Drew Ramsey, welcome to the show.
Max, it's nice to be back with you.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. This is like brain food mecca. Like I've traveled all this way to come and see you. You're my first post-pandemic and only really post-pandemic. I guess we shouldn't say post-para-pandemic trip. The
Parapandemic.
para-pandemic trip. I had to come. This is the official book launch party.
I love that. We're celebrating Eat, your new book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Nourish your way to better mental health in 6 weeks. That is a very important topic, especially these days.
Well, that's I think why I wanted to come and speak with you, and why I like speaking with you about this is to try and understand what we can do right now and why it matters. Thank you for that. Why it matters right now in terms of thinking about coming out of the pandemic and what we can do for our mental health. And then just think about the new data that everybody needs to know about, like how we don't really still connect our food with our mental health and our brain health like we need to.
Yeah, it's super important. Would you say that food is a major leverage point for people in terms of their mental health these days?
I think so. I mean, I think everyone got a real taste of what it's like to be at home with a different set of foods, not to eat restaurant food, for example. And then the first time you do that again, and it's exciting. You don't have to do the dishes, but also it's maybe saltier than you remembered, or it doesn't leave you feeling quite like home cooking did. All the types of foods that you struggled with, or we all struggled with when we had insomnia, or we had really bad anxiety. Remember those first few months of the pandemic?
Mm.
Those were like my Triscuit months. It's like that was my anxious food. And and so now coming out of it, I think that there's so much that people can do in terms of what we've learned about who we are as eaters and then what we need to do to improve based on the latest evidence.
I love that. It's interesting that um, it has been for many people an unprecedented intermission from restaurant food. Because we've been stuck at home more, and you would think that that would lead to improved, uh, nu- you know, dietary patterns, right? Like increased consumption of whole foods, higher food quality. But actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like it's what's happened has been the inverse, right? Because we're spending more time at home, so and we're of course stressed out due to the panic porn that pervades our the mainstream media, and so it's left a lot of people reaching for more junk foods.
Well, I think that there's also we just never had to cook this many meals for our. I mean, at one point we'd made dinner for my wife and my parents and our kids, or my wife and I had made dinner for everyone. Uh, it's like hundreds and hundreds of meals in a row.
Hmm.
Like it was like running a very interesting small restaurant. The quarantine. But and so it was interesting to see what happens. Also, for the first time, a lot of people listening, we had those periods where we didn't have some of the foods that we like couldn't get bananas, or all the canned beans were just gone off the shelves.
Hmm.
And so I think we all learned a lot. I do what you're talking about, which is how people shifted towards convenient foods, towards more of the processed foods that we all know we should eat less of. I think that has certainly happened because they're easy and often they make us feel good in the short term. I mean, that's how they're designed.
Yeah. Have but you have like experience in the kitchen, right? Would you say you're a chef at this point? You've written a number of cookbooks and
This is my 4th book with recipes, and I'm a parent, so I'm like a chef parent. Like, of the parents, like, I like to cook, and I always have, and, I don't know that I consider myself a chef. I'm okay. I'm a good sous chef, Max. Like, if we were cooking, I think I'd sous chef for you.
I like that. Well, I believe this is your third time on the show, but for listeners who are not yet familiar with your work, why don't you just do a little bit of um, a dive into your backstory? Like, how did you come to write this book?
Okay. Well, hey everybody, I'm a nutritional psychiatrist. Maybe to start my backstory. So Max came to my office years ago, and we met. I don't know, not as a patient, just as a friend and as a person interested in brain health and food. You were working on a documentary then. I mean, this is probably a decade ago at this point, um, and I've always been really interested in I think the same subjects that interest Max, and so it's really fun to be here with you to kind of see what's happened to both of us over the last decade. And so I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a Hoosier. I grew up on a farm in Indiana. Went to medical school at IU Med School and was the class of 2000. So it's a little spooky for me, Max. I'm feeling my age here. It's been 2 decades since I finished medical school, and then I came out to Columbia where I've stayed on as a faculty member, and I trained in adult psychiatry. And in my personal life, I was really interested in food. At that time, I was a low-fat vegetarian because that was really what was getting, told everyone that's really what was going to be healthy in the kind of early and late 90s. And it wasn't really working for me. But also, what was interesting is just that's not stuff you talk about in a hospital and medical training and in psychiatry training. And it was just a kind of notable gap. A lot of data started coming out about seafood, the omega-3 fats, and at that time, I didn't eat seafood, and it just got me really thinking, like, how do we incorporate food and nutrition into a clinical model for mental health? And that's really been like the question I've been thinking about then, really both day to day as a clinician, where you're sitting with patients and you're looking for everything you can bring to the table to help them get better. And it's just like, wow, we don't talk to patients about food. We don't talk to them about depression and anxiety and lots of ways to help with that. I mean, I do everything in mental health. I prescribe meds. I do lots of psychotherapy. We do coaching in our practice. I mean, and I've seen all of those things work, but it just feels like food is one of these foundational things that makes a difference. Imagine you're treating somebody with depression and they're just eating nothing but fast food. They're not ever cooking for themselves. They're not shopping, right? You just instantly begin to, if you're a clinician, see opportunities there. And so that's really in a lot of ways what nutritional psychiatry has been about for me over the last decade is how do we help more people learn about this new science? And then how do we through some of these efforts like the book really help to mobilize folks to make changes in their own life?
I love that. You kind of alluded to, or like when we first started talking about how certain mental states can actually dictate, or at the very least influence our food choices, right? Like when we're stressed, we tend to reach for certain comfort foods, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But would you then also say at this point, there is a strong enough body of evidence that we can say that the inverse is also true, that the foods that you reach for can influence your mental states?
I think the answer is a definitive yes. I think anybody who wants to debate that answer, I'm looking forward to that debate because unlike maybe when we first met, and there was a little bit of evidence, correlational evidence, which doesn't end up meaning a lot sometimes. Now we have multiple randomized clinical trials. We have trials where we take individuals, not me, but mainly Felice Jacka's group, but me is the larger world looking at how do we help people beat depression and anxiety. And the best trial of this so far has been the Smiles trial and the Healthy Med trials. Those two trials, between the two of them, have well over 300 patients where they take individuals struggling with depression who are in some sort of treatment, usually psychotherapy or an antidepressant, and not getting all the way better. So not reaching the criteria for what we call full remission. And that's what you want. That's like, I don't feel like I have depression anymore at all. And a lot of patients don't get there with just traditional therapy and meds. And what they found is adding on the Mediterranean diet improves, actually, in the Smiles trial, 33% of individuals went into full remission. If that was a medicine, it would be $1 billion medicine right away. And then a number of trials have followed that. The most recent, interestingly, came out last what 2 falls ago now, looked at college students. They just showed them a video, like depressed and anxious college students. It's like, hey, here's how to eat to help your mental health. Eat more of a Mediterranean style diet. Here's what that is. Here's more plants. Here's a way to make plants tasty. And they gave the students a little box, this box of like nut butter, nuts, olive oil, turmeric, cinnamon, and then called them a week later, like 5 minutes, like, hey Max, like you watched the video, bro? Like you eating the nut butter is cool. Like you tried out the turmeric. And they called him a week later. And they found that over 6 months, just that intervention, talking a total of 23 minutes, led to significant decreases in depression, anxiety, and stress for the college students. So we're starting to have that kind of data. And then on top of that, we just have more knowledge about mechanistically how things like antidepressants work. Just a paper came out in Nature showing that really, antidepressants are both powerful anti-inflammatories, but also induce brain-derived neurotrophic factor. People always think about them as related to serotonin. What doesn't make sense about that is your serotonin in your brain synapse, it goes up in like an hour. But you don't get a clinical effect with an antidepressant for about 3 to 4 weeks usually.
Very interesting.
So there's something going on there, and what most definitively seems to be now is that you're decreasing inflammation and you're increasing neuroplasticity and brain growth.
Hmm.
It is one of the pathways by which those meds work. And what's exciting about that is that's the pathways by which food works. It's also the pathways probably by which exercise works. And so we now have this kind of arsenal of stuff that when we think about, all right, how do we influence mental health? Well, you can probably all agree having a brain that is not dealing with inflammatory factors, having a gut that's healthy, and having a brain that's in what I call in the book, I call it grow mode. And that just means that your brain is best positioned, if possible, when you encounter stressors. Because I'm a psychiatrist. If and I'm sure everyone listening knows this. Like, life's full of stressors, and no matter how good you get at life, you still encounter lots of stressors. So the idea is that if the lens by which we kind of see those stressors and then biologically experience them is something that we have, not full control of, but some control, food kind of makes that lens or shapes that lens in some ways. So yes, that was a long-winded yes.
I really appreciate that. Um, I'm really glad that you brought up these two mechanisms by which it's now, um, we're starting to see are the potential mechanisms by which SSRIs work in a subset of patients to which they are prescribed to. Right? There's like the increase in BDNF, which you mentioned. Which can you just for listeners that are not familiar with BDNF, what is that essentially?
BDNF is the main, what's called neurotrophin. And a neurotrophin is a nerve growth factors. And so these are proteins that are coded for in our DNA. And when they get expressed, they create these molecules, these proteins. And BDNF does a variety of things. It induces the birth of new brain cells or promotes that in the hippocampus called neurogenesis. And then it also helps brain cells with like brain cell resilience. Like I think about BDNF a little bit like, like a good coach, right? That like if I'm a little brain cell, when I'm like not, still like too much for me, like too much cortisol, too much bad news, I just can't handle the stress. I'm gonna call it quits. And I was like, hey, you can still do a little brain cell. And BDNF kind of coaxes brain cells to stay alive. And then the most important thing, I guess, is to make new connections. That if you
Hmm.
think in this very concrete way, what does our brain do? How do we know a healthy brain? A healthy brain is really connected up. You're connected to yourself and your own intention and your focus in your work. You're connected to the people around you that matter in a meaningful way. And so I like this idea of thinking of the brain as our organ of connection, and that you can even see that on the biological level. BDNF increases brain connections. If you look at all of these kind of new wave of medications and molecules being looked at for antidepressant effect, ketamine, psilocybin, all of these, they all seem to function really by inducing rapid sprouting of neurons, and we generally understand that to be a BDNF regulated process.
That's amazing. Exercise is one of the most well-established ways of upregulating BDNF, right?
Yep. I like that one because we feel it. Like you get done with it, you get done with that workout, and not that that's immediate BDNF. We used to think like, oh, you don't feel it that fast. It's like, well, you feel ketamine that fast when it works as an antidepressant. It works within a few hours usually, and so it's kind of remarkable. Um, but yeah, I love the way that exercise, like food, can really be one of those things. When you see people get better and beat depression, not always, you can beat depression in other ways, but that's usually part of the package that people bring to the table.
Yeah. Are there foods that you're aware of that can also lead to an increase in BDNF?
So the way that we back into foods is looking at the nutrients that can increase or influence the BDNF gene. And
Hmm.
so I know of six nutrients with significant evidence that they influence BDNF, or there's a molecular pathway by which they do. And let me see if I can name all. There's zinc. There are the long chain omega 3 fats, but particularly DHA. Magnesium. There's actually a paper where they look at the mechanism of ketamine, and they also look at the mechanism of magnesium, and they're pretty close. There's a flavanol, or some of the flavanols, the polyphenols can induce, and there are a couple of different ones of those that seem to be able to help with BDNF. That's for, I'm gonna guess, oh, I think B12, and then I'm gonna guess iron is my last one, but I might not remember Max.
I think that was more than that.
That
What I
that was
think that was
six.
that was six.
That was
Okay,
six.
interesting.
Let me just go back and say five. Okay,
Okay,
there were and four I'm sure
well,
of.
I love that we have these nutrients because they're pretty ubiquitous, like in the food supply, if you know where to look for them.
Yeah, I think I mean, as a physician, we don't get a lot of training in nutrition, but actually, my last book, in some ways, was just really about that. Here are these 21 nutrients that really matter, And in this book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, I focus on 12 because we looked in the literature. Dr. Laura LaChance and I did a little paper called Antidepressant Foods. Because as we were starting to think about teaching clinicians about this, all right, this makes sense. There's lots of biomolecular pathways that support this. Now there's lots of correlational and now clinical data. Let's start talking to clinicians and see what happens. And then we kind of scratched our heads like, well, what foods are you going to tell them to prescribe? And be like, you all just tell the patients Mediterranean diet, do it, olive oil all the time. And we wanted to kind of back it up a little bit more. And so we looked in the literature and we found there are 12 nutrients really that seem to have a very high level of evidence that they are involved in the prevention and the treatment of depression.
Hmm.
So you look at something like zinc. Populations that eat less zinc have more depression. You look at people who get depressed, they have overall, and as a population level, lower levels of zinc. You look at what zinc does. It induces BDNF. It's involved in like 300 different chemical reactions in the brain. And then you get to, okay, well, what foods have the most zinc? And the plant-based foods with the most zinc are things that oftentimes get concerned in terms of absorption. But in the animal world, it's oysters. And then you think, well, what other nutrients in an oyster? And you get this real quick basic lesson of nutritional psychiatry, which is about nutrient density, where when you look at an oyster, you see long-chain omega-3 fats, you see a plethora of B12, you see selenium, you see zinc, you see iron, you see almost all the nutrients I just named that seem to promote BDNF. And so as you think about then seeking a diet where for the fewest number of calories, you're getting the most nutrients for your brain. And that's really where the food recommendations from Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety come from. Just taking these foods and thinking, or rather taking these nutrients and thinking, what are the foods with the most of them? How do we help people integrate those foods into their life in a meaningful way? And most importantly, I think the piece that really gets missed, and I do think sets nutritional psychiatry apart, is we start to really then look at food categories. So you don't have to eat the kale and the oysters if those are disgusting to you. And as a psychiatrist, I'm really interested in your joyfulness as an eater. There's this chapter in the book called Eat or Heal Thyself, where I just think right now in particular, and I think makes you know this as well as anyone, better than most of us, right? Is how kind of confused people are, how influenced people are, um, how badly people are hurting in terms of really wanting to put their effort into changes in their life and their food that work. And so it's really important to me to present the information in a really balanced way that helps people transcend some of these debates that are not the right debate, that you should eat meat or eat Impossible Burger. I don't think that's the right debate to be having right now. The right debate that we should be having right now is how can we all support one another and ourselves to really get motivated to feed our mental health and feed our brains. I think that's the, or at least that's what I hope shifts and happens.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned oysters because they are very rich in zinc. What are some other foods that are on this list of 12? Is it 12 foods to beat depression?
Well, there's the power players in the book, and those are the foods that really I wanted to highlight because they represent food categories so well. So
Well, we
there's
don't want to we don't want to give them all away, but
we
what
can
about
give them all away. This is the Genius Life podcast. I mean, I was thinking on the way over here, I was thinking like I think all of all of probably the foods on my list are foods in your books too. I think there's a pretty. I think there's a lot of bias support here, but I'm okay with all the debate going on. I'm okay to be here. This is a safe place. It feels like.
it is, and it's okay if there's overlap. And you have 12 foods. I only have 10 genius foods. So you found at least two foods
Well, maybe,
that were
maybe
not on my radar when I wrote genius foods. So I want to get into. We can go through six. What are six of the? You already listed oysters, but what are some other foods?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the other foods that I think are important in terms of why they're on there conceptually. Because again, whether those are the foods or not for you, it's more of what do they represent. Like, why is kefir on the list? It's a fermented dairy product. It's a more liquidy than yogurt. It also has more colony forming units than really any other food. If you
Hmm.
look in the sciences, when you're thinking about a probiotic, you'll see it's got 2 billion or 50 billion or 100 billion. Well, the live bacteria is in kefir. There are some actually studies showing a serving of kefir can have up to 1 trillion colony forming units, which
Wow.
I'd never seen in a probiotic. But I also think it teaches us something about the importance of fermented foods and where they come from, what they meant to us historically. So kefir is on the list, as are other fermented foods. Cashews.
Wait, before you go into cashews, kefir, there are a number of different types of kefir available to your average consumer. We have like coconut
Oh wow, that's
kefir,
right.
we have
Yeah,
dairy
I know.
kefir.
Yeah.
Is there a preference? What if you're trying to be dairy free?
Then I don't think you should drink a dairy kefir. I think that's not going to be good for you.
Fair. Is coconut kefir a good second place option?
I think so in the sense that as you ferment really anything, whether it's kombucha, you're fermenting tea and sugar, whether it's you know, what do they ferment in the coconut fermented drink? Is that coconut milk?
That's a good, well,
Coconut,
coconut water has
coconut.
sugar in it, so I
Yeah.
would imagine it's a substrate for some,
So I think
sure
that
there's
those
some bacteria out there
I
be
think
happy
those
to
are
eat that.
interesting replacements. I think that one of the nice things about kefir, and I guess why it's on the list, is I think it's an interesting way to be provocative about the dairy concerns that sometimes people have. Because as you ferment dairies, you tend to get rid of lactose, just like when you ferment glutinous materials, you tend to get rid of gluten. There's actually a study of a double gluten fermentation that removed all of the gluten. You could literally label it as gluten free.
Wow.
So fermentation's a powerful thing.
Hmm.
But yes, I think the short answer is if kefir is not your thing, find some fermented foods and experiment with them and see what can work for you. Um, cashews have just been a big part of our house since we started having kids. Because when you have kids, there's this whole like anxiety trip. When do you feed them nuts? And it's like a deep rabbit hole to get into on the internet. And so we started being really strange parents. We started like chewing up nuts and feeding them to our children, like little like kind of like birds, I guess. Is I don't know. It's gonna horrify everyone, but yeah, that's what we did. And then cashews entered our life just because breast milk tends not to have as much iron. It's definitely by far the best food for babies, but cashews are a higher iron containing nut. So certainly not the only iron containing food we gave our kids, but one of them. Um, some of the other foods on there, red peppers, just looking vitamin C was one of the nutrients made the list, and everyone goes to citrus. That's a fine choice, but I just like peppers and using them in food, and red peppers just have a plethora of vitamin C.
Did
Um,
you know that red peppers, like all nightshades, have trace amounts of caffeine, not caffeine, nicotine in them?
I have heard that, and yeah, I think that's that's one of those fascinating things you see in the plant world, this homology that exists, right? Where you get things like, melatonin in plants.
Cherries,
Yeah,
right?
actually a lot of different foods. Cherries have a little tiny bit.
Hmm.
Um, and they all actually have they all have like picograms. It's like little tiny amounts. But it's just it's fascinating that we think about how intertwined we are with these other organisms and how we share common molecules. It's I think really inspiring. I think it's also one of the reasons I end up being, I wouldn't say a Luddite. I just really trust traditional foods. Is I just think, look, there's a lot been going on that you don't have any idea about, you and me, right? The microbiome. 10 years ago, we wouldn't even mention that word. We were like bugs in your gut, and those wouldn't be part of talking about depression and anxiety. And so I trust natural foods because I think that's where we came from, and that's what our brains have been made out of. And currently, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of things informing the mental health epidemic, but certainly one of them that looks real suspicious to me in the data has been the way that we've changed how we food nourish our brains.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, that's a big rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, I mean the uber hyper industrialization of our food supply, our just chronic exposure to industrially produced toxicants, whether they're endocrine disruptors or heavy metals, you name it. But that's the subject for a different conversation. We were up to bell peppers.
But let's talk about some other foods. Let's definitely talk about some seafoods. And that was the book ends with a 6 week plan, really, to try and do what we do in our clinic, which just help people jumpstart their motivation, transcend all of the strange voices we hear in our heads about and on the internet about food and what we should do, and really think about you and your life, where you are, what goals you have, and how you can evolve as an eater. And so seafood is a really important category.
Hmm.
It is where you find these long chain omega-3 fats. You also just find a lot of nutrient density when you look at salmon or anchovies or oysters or clams and mussels. And so anchovies and wild salmon were the two that I thought were most accessible to people. and really that you can find in very budget friendly ways. There's a
Mm.
lot of course, concern about, are these foods accessible to people? That's one of my favorite recipes in the book is the salmon burgers. You ask if I'm a chef, and let me tell you, I feel like the best chef in the world when my children eat these wild salmon burgers because you can do them as little croquettes and they're delicious. You can do them with a variety of different, they're an almond flour or a coconut. I mean, you can really use a lot of different bases. In the book, we make them a couple different ways, a honey soy and a kind of dill salmon burger. But they're in there because of nutrient density, because of the omega-3 fats, and also just because seafood tends to, if you look at all these traditional diets that are really, really healthy for the brain, Japanese diet, a Norwegian diet, the Mediterranean diet, there's just more seafood in there than Americans tend to consume.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm a huge fan of anchovies. I'm glad that you brought those up. They're sort
Totally
of
underutilized, right? There's
totally.
like we just learned about them in America, like, ooh, like they're on pizza and they stink. And it's just like that's just so, I mean, first of all, that's not true, but
It's not true. A lot of people say that about sardines. I don't find that I understand why people have this trepidation to try them, that they're a little slimy, but they don't stink to me.
I get that. I was really sensitive to seafood. I didn't eat any seafood till I was maybe like 30. And so I do the way that like they do smell a little fishy to me.
Do
Even
they?
salmon sometimes is a little for me, just a little. I just think I'm sensitive to fish. I like it all now, but I think it takes a little while to develop the palate. What do you what are some good ways you do anchovies in the house?
Oh man, well I find that anchovies in a salad are just game changed. Like game changed. Especially if you there's a dressing that I have in Genius Foods. It's like a nutritional yeast based dressing where it's basically it's extra virgin olive oil, apple cider vinegar, nutritional yeast, salt, pepper, and it's like this like cheesy.
And the fishies, don't forget the fishies.
Well, no, here's the thing. So the anchovies are not included in that salad dressing just because I knew that it would turn people off. But if you throw anchovies into that, it's just amazing. So yeah. So just I mean, but any salad, like make a salad, put anchovies into it. Don't forget that anchovies are generally used in Caesar salad dressing,
That
which is
my
amazing.
my all kale Caesar salad, my favorite Caesar salad or just salad recipe is the all kale Caesar, lacinato kale, chiffonade. So just roll them up and slice it real thin, and then a Caesar dressing with lots of anchovies. The recipe developer was like, you can't put in more anchovies. It's like I want to put in more.
No, anchovies are if you're listening to this and you haven't tried it, just try them. Just make sure that it can be hard to find anchovies in extra virgin olive oil.
Yep.
Um
Get them in extra virgin olive oil, make a vinaigrette, make Max's salad dressing and mix them in, make the all kale Caesar and eat to beat depression and anxiety, and make pasta. I mean, the anchovy or
yes.
sardine pasta, like, oh, so good.
Yeah. You can also find anchovy paste, which if the idea of eating like an anchovy
Yep.
weirds you out, you can find the paste.
That's an easy hack for the Caesar salad dressings where you just put a little squirt in, mix it in with your whatever you like to put in there, olive oil, mayo,
Yeah.
and you know, whatever your cheese of choice is.
Let's talk briefly about plant-based diets. Um there's a lot of reasons why people adopt plant-based diets, right? And whatever reason is your reason, if you happen to be on a plant-based diet, totally fine. But from your vantage point as a mental health expert, do plant-based diets concern you?
Plant-based diets concern me because it's a dietary pattern that requires supplementation. Um, that you might be able to debate that a little bit now. There have been some B12 analogs, I think, found in a couple types of algae um, uh, and long-chain omega-3 fats. I think, one might be able to argue you make those, right? So it's not exactly an essential fat, although they're essential fats. So, and then when you look at some of the data, if you just want to cherry pick like some of the concerning stuff, like the Epic Oxford study that found 52% of male vegans were B12 deficient. So just frankly B12 deficient. And then 20, I think 3% additionally were B12 insufficient, meaning that your level is normal, but it's so low that it's not really offering you the mental health and brain benefits that a normal B12 level offers. So you can certainly supplement, as every vegan listening knows. So I think that, but it just concerns me. It concerns me to kind of direct people towards a diet that you need a supplement to for. Um, it concerns me because of manure and because of animal husbandry. We don't have lots of animals on our farm, but we've been told the raccoon ate all of them, and a gray fox, a big gray fox, that I'm pretty sure ate some of them. But we've been living with chickens for the past couple of years, and it's just a really it's just an interesting experience as human to have these animals that we hatch some chickens and they imprint it on us. So you like walk out the door and they like come to you and then they give you food and then they also like scratch around and fertilize your garden because they have this really wonderful high nitrogen poop, and you feel that you're part of this food cycle, part of the farm cycle. And so maybe that's just like nostalgia, I guess, but it seems to me there's something going on there. Does that mean that we should have massive factory farms and we should have everyone eating lots and lots of meat? I don't think so. But to me, it means that there's something very human about living in existence with animals, that includes eating them. At least for me in the path I've chosen. Now, I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and I didn't feel that way. I was in a period of my life where meat grossed me out. The smell of meat grossed me out. Um, eh, so I've obviously, in my own way, I guess, evolved and shifted. And I think for anybody listening, that's just my request as a psychiatrist is that you have a plan that makes sense to you. I mean, that's really the work, or our work in mental health is, it's not to indoctrinate people into me. I mean, you can really tell I approach nutrition, I think, I hope, like a psychiatrist, which our job is really to live in a world with a stance of neutrality and encouragement, that I'm not trying to make you eat like me. I'm hoping to give you some guidelines to help you eat like you. And so that's where I try to, I wouldn't say bypass the issue. I don't know. I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm tired of debating whether people should eat a hamburger or not because I think that's your decision. That's not my decision. And I think people can argue the data either way at this point. Um, I I think some of the other concerns probably yeah, so the manure is a big concern. I went out to the biggest kale field in America back in my like kale hero days, and I think that's when Max intervened. He helped me. He's like pulled me aside. He's like, "Bro, you got to expand beyond the kale." He's like, "Live beyond the kale, Max."
Were you vegetarian at that point?
No, I came out of the vegetarianism before I met you.
Hmm.
And it was interesting. It was also the low fat vegetarian, a lot of Snackwell cookies. I think maybe I'm a little scarred by that of just, I've believed it, right? Don't eat cholesterol. And then you look at like, what's the data supporting dietary cholesterol being an evil component of the human diet? And it's not very impressive, dietary cholesterol. Cholesterol levels, for sure, important part of prevention in cardiology. But dietary cholesterol, I wasn't very, at least I just wasn't impressed by the amount of data that there was. And so those are some of the, but anyway, this big kale field, you're standing there, and we drove by it, and it's grown in the manure from the local dairy farms. And you're sitting there looking at that, you know what that organic kale represents to the plant-based movement, and then you're looking at the reality of where it comes from, that it doesn't exist without the dairy industry, and that and actually it was growing in between all those kale plants was purslane, which is an even more nutrient dense kale, or even more nutrient dense than kale. Is probably the best green out there, and it's just laid to waste. It's not even.
Purslane.
Purslane is the highest. I mean, if you're looking for plant-based omega-3s, it's the highest plant-based ALA containing food. And it is just incredibly nutrient dense. It grows as a weed in most people's gardens. It's got a little succulent look to it, and it's got a little kind of a citrusy, almost viscous. You might even say like that, not the slime of okra, but just a little bit more viscosity, like a almost like a succulent plant. It's really nice on a grill. If you take a spring, like a sprig of it, you can grill it, and super. It's got a really, really nice. So manure, B12, and the omega-3 fats, and then in terms of the ethics of it. Sorry, I keep hitting this. The ethics of it. Well, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, but in my own thinking, there's something about the value of life and the importance of having gratitude for your food. And whether you're taking the life of a plant, whether you're taking the life of an animal, I think being more aware and involved in that process is certainly one of the things from the vegan movement that I think it's important that everybody adopts, because I think that leads you to a lot of different places, and a lot of it's certainly those types of ideas thinking about the environmental impact of my food, thinking about the cruelty around the food that I eat. Those all really influenced me and how I've developed my eating over the past, I don't know, decade.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Having empathy and gratitude for the animals that were, unwittingly sacrificed, for your benefit, I think is a very important part of the equation. And it really bothers me that people have this perception that it's sort of this mutually exclusive scenario where if you eat meat, then you can't possibly care about animals. You can do both. You can be an omnivore and you can also deeply care about the environment and animals. And it's just like this straw man argument that has come from I have no idea where. But if you're an empathetic person, but you also care about the health of yourself and your loved ones, you can embody both and you should embody both.
I think people have a really hard time with death, Max. I mean, I think it's just something that we tend to avoid. I think as I've gotten to sit with people as they think about their own mortality, and one of the things that kind of happens in a psychiatrist's office, or as they struggle with grief and grieving when they lose someone. And I think that there's something about the way that life and death and nourishment get caught up and intertwined together that is just, I don't know, it's easy to oversimplify it.
Hmm.
And I certainly respect that. One of my favorite vegans said to me, "It's not so much that I object to eating meat every now and then. I just know I won't make the right choices, and I just don't want to be involved in that system." And I can really appreciate that. I wouldn't say I always make the my own kind of quote unquote right choices. It's also interesting during the pandemic for the first time, really I kind of moved to a really pastured centered type meat. We buy a quarter of a cow from our neighbor, and so we raise some of the hay that it's fed, and can watch them grow up. It's really kind of idyllic, and really purely grass fed animals, um, and then I like doing that meat share because it also challenges me as a cook, where instead of just getting in that rut that Americans in, right? Strip steaks, ribeyes, and burgers, and that's and filet mignon.
Those are my four love languages right there.
Right, exactly, exactly. And I don't think that I think you also, I mean, I think you love I think you speak a little like beef shank. I think you probably speak a little you just had brisket for lunch.
I
I mean,
did.
don't say like you don't speak, but it challenges you to use those other cuts of meat, right? How to learn to use a slow cooker, how to make a great beef stew, and I really appreciated that in terms of expanding my own way that just my family and I use meat. Also, I think it's just interesting around kids. I mean, certainly there's a big debate around veganism and vegetarianism in kids because kids don't really get to make a choice, and there's not good data. I mean, I think that there's so much kind of saber rattling and so much animosity in the conversation and so much yelling right now that uh, sometimes it feels like we really need to step back and say, like, okay, there's really not a lot of data for a lot of this stuff. And there certainly has not been longitudinal studies of veganisms in childhood so, uh, yeah, and then there are some concerning studies. Like there's the case series of looking at B12 deficiency in women during pregnancy. It was looking at a group that had half the group had pernicious anemia, so that's an autoimmune disorder by which you end up not being able to absorb B12, and then the other group had were vegans, and they just found lasting neurological and neurocognitive effects. That just the kids who came out of a vegan pregnancy tend to have I'm gonna this maybe I just want to talk about the results of the study, but it sounds like I'm saying something worse than I am. But they tend to have smaller heads. There were some cognitive findings. I'm not going to remember the exact details, and I don't want to get them wrong on your podcast. But
Mm.
just the bottom line of that is concerning when you just think about thinking about a population really giving up foods that generally we have always eaten. I mean, there haven't been any purely vegan societies, and I think there's probably some reasoning behind that. I remember once someone was telling me they found one, and like then that meant something. And I was thinking, well, the majority haven't been, and also even if you found a like vegan society, like does that necessarily mean that it's healthy, right,
Mm.
or that it's good for cognitive benefits? And that's where I'm saying, like, I think there's a lot of debating right now, sometimes without a lot of data. And so I think what's most important as a physician and mental health professional that people should know is you should have your B12 level checked, whether you're a
Mm.
vegan, vegetarian or not, and your vitamin D level. And you should make sure that you have enough of those. You should think about things like the omega-3 fats in your diet. And if there are some things, for example, if you don't want to eat anything that has a face or eat anything with a mother, I don't know. What about a clam? A clam is the top nutritional source of vitamin B12 if you're a flexible vegan. I've met a lot of folks who are vegans and then they hear about mussels and clams and they're foods that they've already either eaten or liked or part of their cultures. I once worked with a woman from Belgium, and she was a
Mm.
vegan. And then we're going through her food history, and I sort of mentioned mussels, clams, and oysters. She said, "Oh, I'm a vegan except for those."
Mm.
And I was like, "Well, that's what you need." As you know, our friend Mark Hyman with the vegan diet. I mean, there's a lot of that makes perfect sense in terms of let's just go over the stuff that we all agree on: olive oil good, plants good, seafood good. So.
Yeah, I mean, I just God, there's so much there, and I love everything that you've just said. I've said publicly, and I stand by this fully that I would have no problem loving somebody, being in a relationship with somebody who is plant based or mostly plant based, but I would not procreate with somebody who was not willing to, at least during the carriage of the pregnancy, consume meat and animal products.
Oh, what about if they wanted to supplement like you and your vegan girlfriend? I like imagining this, like Max's super vegan girlfriend, and I'd like to talk. We could probably spend a little bit of this podcast talking about how to find her, Max, if you want. I mean,
Maybe.
I love talking to people about the relationships. But even if she took like a long chain omega-3 fat supplement, an algal supplement, and a B12 supplement, a prenatal vitamin, and she's eating like lots of healthy plants,
I mean, I feel like that would be
and she loves you a lot, Max. She wants to have a baby with you.
And well, first of all, I wouldn't impose my way of thinking on anybody else. So nobody listening to this. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't
Except
and
for
shouldn't procreate with somebody.
future vegan girlfriends of Max might want to pay attention to
I
this. So,
personally wouldn't want to risk that. And I also feel like what you just described, like looking at each nutrient in accordance with the current body of literature, that's what that is that's nutrientism or nutritionism,
hmm
where we make the attempt,
right. The
with
feeble attempt. Let's just
with
call it
with
that.
utter hubris, right? To think that we know exactly what it is in animal products that a neonate needs to cognitively and in every other way physiologically flourish, right? I just don't trust our knowledge that much, and I would default. I would want to default to, eating the foods that I know that human beings ate during the time in which our brains evolved. Um, Choline, for example. You didn't mention choline.
I didn't mention choline. Choline actually, it didn't make the list of 12 nutrients on the antidepressant food scale, and we added it because choline, like folate, is very much tied to pregnancy outcomes.
Hmm.
So folate, the reason folic acid is a prenatal vitamin is that if you have low folate or folic acid during pregnancy you end up with what are called neural tube defects. That literally there aren't enough B vitamin or methyl groups to close. This is the neural tube. So as the kind of you go from 16 cells to like a little creature with a spinal cord, that doesn't go as well if you don't have enough folate. Well, the same types of data exists for choline, and you find choline. I like choline because you find it in eggs and tofu, and so it really like splits everybody in terms of a nutrient that um, uh, are two foods that tend to track with different types of dietary tribes. But choline is just one of, and it's actually one of the only nutrients that's really tied to anxiety. Just a correlational cross-sectional study, but still, that it's an interesting nutrient.
Yeah, I see. I think that would be the compromise. And the compromise, which if you're in a relationship with somebody, because again, I didn't say that I wouldn't be in a relationship with somebody on a plant-based diet, but if they weren't willing to meet me halfway during the pregnancy when we're co-creating.
What food would you have her meet you halfway with?
Meet me at, like, I mean, at the very least, take like beef liver supplements. You don't even have to
Beef
eat it.
beef liver is. I mean, I don't know. That's not. I don't think that's halfway. That's pretty. I mean, that's like
Pretty
a.
hardcore.
It's a little aggro. I mean, the liver is. I
But
mean,
they
it's.
make them in pills. You can buy beef liver
I
pills.
know. I know. They make everything in pills now. It really kind of a. It's a strange world we're in,
By
Max.
the way, also the foods that the mother eats also influences the nutritional composition of breast milk.
For sure. That was, I mean, that was a part of, I guess, my dad's life over the past decade was my wife breastfed for a long time, and it was really just interesting as a man to participate with that. It's funny when you drink breast milk or talk about having tried breast milk, how many people are like pro brain health and pro food and really like woke in lots of ways, and then they like make a retching sound, and I think it's like one of the most misogynistic things I've ever seen, because breast milk's really delicious. It's a little bit sweet. It's by far the best brain food, and I think it's yeah, it's one of those things that certainly food affects. Also, the palate of the child
Hmm.
is influenced. So if you're a mom just eating lots and lots of processed food, so lots of sweets, lots of sugar, right? You're going to have a breast milk that, and the child's going to have an in utero experience where taste develops. That's just different than a mom that's eating lots of garlic and lots of seafood. And so, again, there's when you're thinking about having kids and starting a family, I just think these are the types of things that make parents really, really neurotic. But there, I think, is great data and beyond that, just lots of great experience of how having a family can be done in really, really healthy ways. I think that's exactly the opposite of what gets marketed to us as parents, where like, oh, you see your commercials of like, it's total chaos, time to order in, or don't you need like more processed food to make your life convenient, or like, don't you need some gel that's green for your child to get their veggies? And it turns kids into this, like, I don't know, somehow they're horrible when they're just trying to like figure it out and get fed and not eat disgusting stuff,
Hmm.
which a lot of adult food tastes disgusting to children. And parents who, increasingly, even if you're not a helicopter parents, are just, aware and very worried about kids getting proper nourishment. And I think that's where also the supplement becomes such a even even in my house, my kids will get my son will get up on the counter and they'll say like, "Dad, can we have a multivitamin? Because we haven't had one for like a week, just in case." And you'll hear me say like, "Oh, this, multivitamins for," but in the dad mode, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, sweetie, just in case." And it's a type of, I think, a type of thinking that forgets what we are. It forgets that we're like alpha predators, giant, cerebral containing creatures that like can live on cardboard for a week,
Hmm.
and that we can extract all the nutrients we need from a variety of sources because we have this massively big, metabolically hungry brain. And so,
Yeah. I
Max,
just
I'm trying to figure out. God, so the vegan girlfriend that you're gonna have a baby with is really intriguing me, and yeah, and I want to talk about all the barriers between you and she. But I do think the beef liver. Maybe you should take the supplement. But I'd want you to try the mussels and the bivalves with her because I think those. I mean, they're very
well,
romantic.
I'd be down, but those are not vegan. I'm just
Well, but
saying
neither
if
is a
she
beef liver supplement. I
I'm just saying
mean,
it would be a we would reach an impasse if she were not willing to compromise with me temporarily. I'm not saying that I want to dictate her diet.
yeah, but Max, there's a difference between the big brown eyes of a cow and then that little like, clam that's just gurgling in the sea. I just think you should appreciate her perspective if that's what she's worried about. She's got a lot of feelings.
I would completely appreciate her perspective if she were willing to also appreciate mine and that we could meet in the middle because at the end of the day, what the brain it's you're influencing something that's going to have lifelong repercussions on this child.
I think I want to be your digital wig man now that you're looking for
Yeah,
love. And yeah, and I think, and just so all of the women listening, vegan or not, I'm going to be here to help you and Max through this stuff.
I love that. You'll be the best man at my I
See
al-
right there, the wedding. Like, what, are you gonna have like a vegan aisle and a non-vegan aisle? Be like, over here we've got like the whole hog, and there'll be like have to be like a divider, because a lot of her vegan friends will probably be like you're gonna it's gonna be a complicated wedding to plan. But I like this probably one of my favorite things as a shrink. Too fair. I love helping people buy their first car. You do a lot of that in my business, and I love wedding planning. It's
Hmm.
really it's like the best part of the job.
Is it? Yeah, I've got very little experience with that,
It's gonna be beautiful.
but it's interesting, like the reason why I feel so strongly about this is my mom early in her life, she was a meat eater. She was always health conscious, but she ate meat early in her life. Like I remember she would always tell me that her favorite thing to eat was which, I've I think I've maybe tried it once or twice, and I always thought it was a very weird thing to enjoy as much as it seems like she did. But she used to love when she was like a kid. She would tell me she loved like beef tongue, which I always thought was kind of strange. But then as she got older and she became more and more empathetic, my mom, um, for most of my life, she was a vegetarian. But during the time in which she, I think like probably just maybe a year up until maybe a year or two after she had me, she was more of an omnivore. Her diet was more omnivorous and it's in pattern um and she basically stripped her diet of some of these more nutrient dense animal foods. And instead, she started reaching for the foods that were like, would have that red heart healthy logo on them. And I'm not saying that the removal of animal products is why my mom's health ended up being so disastrous, which, anybody who knows me and my story, regular listeners of this show will know, it really was terrible. It didn't help her. And I do think, my hypothesis is that if she would have had a more sort of balanced diet and, had she incorporated some of these more nutrient dense foods, I don't know. I think, and I'll never be able to prove this, but I think that she, would have had better odds. Um, but nonetheless, I mean, she had I think a more balanced diet um, and I appreciate her for that because, I was born premature, but I've had very few like health problems, up until this, or at least, to this point in my life, knock on wood. Uh,
You're looking pretty healthy still.
yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I think it's important. Diet, I'm a huge, as you are, I mean, what we eat matters. Um, and there's so much convoluting, biased information coming out there. And, it's never as simple and straightforward as people like to make it out to be. Um, and so I think at the end of the day, you have to default to logic, to common sense. And, when looking at the nutrients contained in animal products, I mean, it's like plug and play for our body. Plants are amazing. Like, I love plants. I eat them all the time. We just had lunch, but in many ways, plants have like a different operating system than us. Whereas
Hmm.
when you eat, like, when you consume, um, red meat or mollusks or whatever, you're getting the nutrients in those foods in the bioidentical forms in which they present in your body.
Yeah, and many of them are more bioavailable when you look at things like zinc and iron, where plants have worked very hard to get those things out of the rock, and then they hang on to them very tightly. It's one of the reasons that cooking plants or cooking things like beans and lentils is so important is the anti-nutrients that people have been getting folks worried about. Unfortunately, those dissipate when you cook them, just so you know.
Yeah.
But I like to say that you're saying that they sort of serve a little bit of a different function, right? In the terms of you're thinking about, fats and proteins you end up getting from animal products, especially long chain fats, and then the plant world really thinking about how we fuel and feed the microbiome, and then also I think keep us full. I think about what so many people struggle with is feeling full and satiated,
Mhm.
and I don't think that's something you and I struggle with very much. I don't think it's I don't think it's because of our like I don't know genetics. I think it's because of probably the way that we eat. I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you like even when I do get hungry, I don't find it's like an overwhelming thing. Not that I ignore it. It's just I don't know. I feel well nourished.
Yeah, I prioritize protein and I prioritize fibrous veggies, and I feel as though I eat a lot, but I don't ever, I think the beautiful thing about eating the way that we eat is that you feel as though you're eating more when in
Mhm.
reality you're eating less.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think that's where that kind of I don't know that combination of having the proteins and the animal-based proteins and having the plants, where as we get into this kind of dialectic and this division of this like one or the other, I just think it really and it misses the point, and I think it misses evolutionarily what we've done. Max, I also want to go back. What you were talking about, I think, was is also interesting a moment ago with your mom of thinking about how are also our dietary advice, we don't often shift it, certainly in the general media landscape. It's not specific towards life stage. So we sort of think about pregnancy as like, well, they need a lot of food, a lot of nutrients, right? Making a baby. And then And then kids are like, they need a lot of food too. They're growing. And then as people age and want to avoid dementia, well, they need a lot of plants and olive oil and red wine, of course, the number one food to fight dementia, right? And talk to anybody in their 40s and 50s, and you take their dietary history, eventually they look at you with the wink and they're like, "Don't worry, don't worry. I drink red wine for my brain." It's like, okay, that's not one of my power player brain foods, but that throughout those different stages in life, probably there are different things that different people need nutritionally. I mean, there's some certainly overlap. All pregnant women need certain nutrients, um, but I think it's been interesting to me to sort of see how we lose that granularity, and kind of make it like it's one human diet all the time, all day long, as opposed to there are different. Like, I had a friend from a Korean background and told me there's a traditional Korean stew after pregnancy that has lots and lots of seaweed in it, and and just kind of one of the major causes of uh, brain developmental delay is we used to call it mental retardation, but we don't anymore. Is iodine deficiency is the top cause of what's called cretinism. And so, there are all these kind of ways traditionally that people have really, one way or another, figured out these nutrients in these foods that are so important. Seaweed is another one of the power players. It's just such a concentrated source of iodine.
I love dulse. Is that how you pronounce it? Dulse seaweed. It's like loaded.
Yeah, I
And
love
kelp.
all the seaweeds. I just started making. There's one of my favorite recipes in the book is the dashi. I'd never made dashi at home. Have you made dashi at home, where you just like, or not? You take bonito flakes, which is, I didn't know this. They're basically like a fermented, dried, smoked shipjack tuna,
Hmm.
and then gets flaked. It's a very traditional Japanese preparation, and you basically those and a big piece of kombu seaweed are the basic. And you bring all that together to, you don't quite bring it to a boil, just brief boil, and that makes dashi, which is the traditional broth that most people recognize from like a ramen soup, for example. And it's really easy to make at home. Just a good example of a way to just get more seafood and seaweed into your diet and get some of those nutrients. One of those things that most of us in America have never made or thought about. And in part of researching this book and then going to Japan became part of. I mean, just every month I make a big batch of dashi and I drink it in the morning and drink it in the evening. It's just amazing for you.
That's awesome. Well, it's a beautiful book, and I have no doubt that it's going to add tremendous value to anybody who picks it up and applies, all the incredible research that you've done, and all the work that you've put into this book. Um, where can people pick it up?
Well, thanks, Max, for saying that. It means a lot coming from you, and it's nice to be here with you. People can check out the book on my website, ramseymd.com. You can pick it up or pre-order it at a local bookstore. You can find it on Amazon, of course, and then I'm easiest to find at drewramseymd.com, and then on Instagram, you know, where I hang out a lot.
Yeah, you've been upping your Instagram game.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. Means a lot coming from you, particularly. But yeah, yeah. I've been trying to just. There's just so much information coming out about mental health, and so I've just really made it a goal to try and be a good, balanced resource for people to know what my biases are. Ooh, that's the brain food salad
Ooh,
recipe.
this looks
Well, I gave
good.
people these recipes where, again, that you make the brain food salad that's yours. There's a recipe for pesto in there too. I think pesto is a super underutilized brain food. Just great way to do leafy greens, nuts, olive oil, garlic, like all our favorites. So yeah, and these illustrations, they came right up. They're from Instagram. There's like a nice digital little story. Katrin Witek, who did the did the illustrations in the book. There are about 30 illustrations in the book, trying to describe all the principles, but also some of the foods and even some of the recipes. And it was our podcast, my podcast with you, that she made a sketch of
Oh,
the
oh,
Genius Life, and
I
she
remember that.
posted it, and everybody loved it. Then I reposted it, and people just really responded. And so I messaged her. I said, "Hey, thanks. Is this something you do?" And she started doing more sketches of each of the nutrients in my last book. And then as I thought about this book, it just seemed like be such a fun way to describe the information to people. So there's another way to interact with it besides the recipes and the text.
Yeah, you do have amazing illustrations. That's something that I wish my books had. Like,
You should talk to Katrin.
yeah. I mean, these are really beautiful. So it's a great read. I mean, it's super dense, but then it's broken up with these like beautiful illustrations that anybody will be able to understand. So if you have any kinds of, issues with depression, anxiety, this is definitely going to be a book that you're going to want to pick up for loved ones, who may be struggling. Um, Thanks for being here. This was a ton of fun. My last question that gets asked to everybody that's on the show: what does it mean to you to live a genius life?
I knew you were going to ask that. And so I've been thinking about it all day. And I came to this real, I don't know, clear feeling that I feel like I'm living a genius life, Max. And I think that for me, the things that I've seen myself develop as a middle-aged man at this point, that I have a really deep and loving and intimate relationship with my wife and my partner, that I feel really present. Maybe not as present as I want to be, but as present as time allows for with my kids, and a really involved dad. I like the fact that hundreds and hundreds of days went by where I cooked dinner every night for them, and played with them and jump on the trampoline with them. And and then I get to work in a really meaningful field and help people change their lives, and get the real privilege and honor of hearing the real inner workings of people's minds. And and so to me, being fulfilled in work and in love, and getting to engage in creativity and have an active and healthy life, I mean, to me, I can't imagine wishing for anything more. And so maybe that sounds a little arrogant. I don't mean it to be. I think I say it to let people know that I think a genius life is your life. And I think a genius life is you living your life to the best of your abilities. And I think the brain foods that Max and I recommend you eat is one part of it. But I think it's out there for you. And I know it's been out there for me. So that's what I think a genius life is.
I love that. I got to come and visit you at your farm, man. It sounds beautiful.
You got to come to visit me on my farm. Maybe get to come and visit me in my new branch of my life in Wyoming. There's gonna be some fun changes, but yeah, I would. And you actually have given me. There's a couple things besides planning you and your vegan wife's wedding, which I'm looking forward to. I also, you mentioned that you're a little nervous around horses, and anybody who's been following me on Instagram, I'm like a teenage girl now. I'm really like hardcore in love with a horse. I mean,
Sydney's cracking up.
it's bad. I mean, he's big, he's beautiful. It's like it's all I think about him. I'm away from him right now. I think about him like scratching him and riding him. But you're telling me you're like a little nervous around the horses.
I'm a little bit nervous. Yeah, I'm not into doing things that put me at physical risk. I'm not like I don't surf. I'm not about to ride a horse anytime soon. When Christopher Reeves fell off the horse and became a quadriplegic, that's when at the young age of whatever I was back then, that's when I realized that I'm not going to ride horses anymore.
You've been boxing a bunch. That's just that's like the air. Well, I mean, you're not going to go into the ring. I was a little worried you're going to like suit me up and like punch me
Touche.
a bunch.
That's a fair rebuttal because boxing does put
Well,
you at
maybe you're
physical.
not looking to punch anyone or get punched in the head.
No, I'm not sparring. I'm not
Okay.
fighting.
All right.
I'm boxing purely with a trainer, and I have been brushed in the head by him twice, and it wasn't fun. But no, generally, like at this point, I'm pretty safe, and I think that if you do it safely, it's a really good. It's other than the risk of getting hit in the head, which you don't get in the head. It's a good sport for brain health because it's like your hand-eye coordination. It's
It
like
loo-
full body.
It looks good for you, and also you get that little toy, like the cat toy that you get to wear around your head.
I get to wear a human cat toy.
Yeah, I mean, there's
my
that.
my Instagram
Now,
followers
what about
love
other
that.
like things that put you at risk? Like, what about snowboarding or skiing? Do you
I don't do
that?
any of those things.
You don't do any of that.
No. Uh, I drive fast, but
I mean, it's just sort of funny statistically, right? That's like,
I drive fast, but I drive a safe car. What else do I do? I mean, no, I don't put myself in harm's way because I know that I'd be the statistic, like the 1% of people who go skiing and slam into a tree.
you think
I'd be that person or whatever the statistic is. I don't know. the 0.5% of surfers who end up under a wave and hit their heads on the bottom and become paralyzed, that would be me. Like that would happen to me. That's just how I don't want to.
Well, I mean that. Yeah, I mean,
I've never been that coordinated, like, and there are other things that I love to do. I take creative risks, I take professional risks. I I love to like I work really hard at like being a musician. Like I like work really hard
I
on my.
heard I had such a treat. I got like a full on jam. I almost like started recording. I thought every TGL fan would just love to be here right now, sitting on the edge of your couch, holding a guitar as you just like rocked it. Everybody, Max is a really good musician. If you haven't, I mean, I know he plays a little ukulele every now and then, but he had his like whole looping effect going on, and he was ripping it. It was a real treat. So, if you're a Max fan, you should ask for some more. That was well, I'm not suggesting that you should take more risk. I just think it's and I acknowledge I'm involved in some things that are a little risky and probably a little intentionally because I find it very I find the mitigate like the surfing for me, the surfing is I'm really scared of sharks and I'm really scared of that type of death. Like having put myself into a situation that's athletically stupid and I'm unprepared for, and then I end up, as you said, under a wave, or same thing on the horse, right? We've been jumping these horses, and I remember recently I'm like headed towards this like I don't know 2 foot jump, and I'm looking at it and I'm in this kind of dissociated surreal state almost, where you're really focused, you're really right there in the moment, but I'm also having this feeling of like I'm just kind of assuming the horse is going to go over this thing. And then that doesn't always happen, and people end up like flailed on the ground. And um, that exposure to that anxiety, not like I'm a risk taker and unnecessarily or a thrill seeker like that, but there's something about it I find super motivating in keeping safe. Because I have that, but it's interesting. You have this stance, and maybe it's that you've had some pretty unfortunate things in a certain way, in terms of some, pancreatic cancer is a really rare cancer. Dementia is, not super rare, but pretty rare, and so I appreciate there are specific reasons that you feel that you're going to end up that way. I kind of end up in those situations, and I think I get into this mental space that like maybe this is too much hubris, right? That I'm not going to end up that way,
Hmm.
and that I'm gonna be really. I think that's what pulls me into those things.
That's interesting. See, I think, I have visions that like my default assumption is that I will end up that way because I've seen. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I mean, it may that really seen the vulnerability and the frailty
Well, I mean,
up close and
yeah.
personal.
Well, I think you're also talking. I mean, anybody who doesn't acknowledge that. I remember when I was in Puerto Rico surfing, some guy came out who had dislocated his hip. And I remember thinking like, I vaguely remember how to put the hip back in. And then I realized, it's like, no, that's not why you're putting your hip in. The psychiatrist is randomly on the beach with you. But you definitely see the results of it. I don't think you should be dissociated from that in any way. Um, yeah, it would be really what. Well, also, you're also thinking about maybe surfing in that kind of California guy, like big wave surfing, and I think that there's something about the motion that connects these three dangerous sports: snowboarding, horseback riding, and surfing. And there's something about the brief suspension of gravity and the kind of mimicking of a flying feeling. And I think it'd be really interesting to longboard with you, where you're in a really rolling, like 1 to 2 foot wave. I
Hmm.
think you'd really actually like it because there's no risk. Like the only way you're gonna die is if you like jump into the water head first and like really try to. And at the same time, even with that very small wave, the force is a little terrifying. As you know, you've been in the ocean.
Hmm.
Um, it would be, yeah, because I think that you're gonna die surfing. I think that's I mean, you feel that way, but you have to remember you're always when you're out in the outside, usually you're just falling in the water. And actually the biggest challenge of it I found is controlling the breath and not being anxious while being surrounded in the midst of something that is so much more powerful than you are, that you actually it's not you're not in your alpha predator status. You're just flotsam.
Well, I think that's one of the beautiful things about surfing, right? That there's like this spiritual component to it. which even from afar, I can definitely appreciate.
I brought my wetsuit, my backpack, and I'm literally leaving here right now. And I'm going to get bored and paddle out. It's not big at all out, so if you wanna,
Have fun. I won't
thank
be joining you, but I appreciate the invite, Drew Ramsey.
it'll be a weekend. We'll do like horseback riding, snowboarding, and surfing all together. Max, thank you. It's a treat to be here with you. Thanks for featuring the book. Thanks for all the great content you make and for being a good friend and for helping everybody make good decisions about their health. It's just been an absolute treat watching your career develop and you develop. And I look forward to more of these over the years with you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Likewise, to all you guys out there in podcast land, pick up Drew Ramsey's new book. It's amazing. It's called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Nourish your way to better mental health in 6 weeks. Who doesn't want that? Text me to let me know what you thought can't speak about this episode of the show. 310-299-9401. Would love to hear from you, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace.